Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. I'm Ben, and today I'm joined once again by Michael from Genuine Chit-Chat. Mike, I'm super thrilled to have you back here. We have a very special and interesting discussion for you guys. How have you been? It's been a while, man. It's so happy to have you back. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. As people may be aware, I'm a big fan of some of the things that we're speaking about today. And I will apologize to your listeners because I am still suffering with a little bit of hay fever, but I actually got a cold over the weekend. So I'm a little bit bunged up, currently chewing gum, which I hate doing in a podcast or a conversation like this. So I do apologize. I will not be chiming in people's ears. It's just to stop me sneezing. I just want to put that out there. Nice bit of fun before starting. But like, Ahsoka's never had allergies or anything like that. She's too cool for that. But yeah, me as a little, like a muggle almost, just a non-force user kind of, no. I haven't got that immunity.
Well, I didn't even realize before we started rolling that you're feeling a little bit under the weather. I hope you recover fast. And it sometimes takes a while to get started. We had to basically re-record our podcast starting off like 3 times because it's getting back into the game, getting that vibe and just getting the conversation casual and going. It takes a while a little bit, right? So with our adjustments, guys, today we're talking about the Ahsoka, the character, and obviously the upcoming live action show. And Mike, what I wanted to do in this discussion is basically 2 fans from 2 different generations and perspectives approach just one single character from Star Wars canon and legends perspectives and see how we interacted with her, what she means to us, but also what we expect from this new upcoming show, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, why don't we get started from the very show where Ahsoka is first featured? She is born in the Clone Wars animated show, which aired in 2008, right? And the first question I had for you is, what was your first exposure to this show? And what was your first impression, if you can recall it?
Yeah, so my first impression of Ahsoka was when she was in the Star Wars Clone Wars movie and it was out in theaters, right. And I watched her in there. Mm-hmm. And basically, the movie is essentially just the first 4 episodes of the series, and it led straight onto the series. Mm-hmm. But that was the first time, and funnily enough, so this is going to age me and make some of the older listeners feel upset, and I'm sorry, but when Star Wars Clone Wars came out, I was in my early teens. Mm-hmm. So I went in there kind of fresh off the prequels because it was only a couple of years after Revenge of the Sith came out, and I was like, nah, not a fan of this. I've still got my ticket stub in a little photo album I've got of the last several years of ticket stubs. So I saw that and I was just like, not a fan of this film. I don't think it's very interesting. I wasn't a fan of the animation style very much. And I was just like, she as a character was okay, but I was, Obi-Wan's always been my favorite. As I've gotten older, my Star Wars has expanded, especially to the High Republic and things. My horizons have been expanded upon. There's other characters I like maybe as much as, but as people maybe to see here for my shrine of Ahsoka and Kenobi, I've got Kenobi from Clone Wars and Star Wars Master and Apprentice and Padawan. So it's like in that film, I was like more leaning on what Kenobi was up to, and it kind of was a more Ahsoka centric. So I remember just not being phased by it, and then I didn't watch the show till years later, but I'm sure we'll get onto that.
Interesting. Okay. So on my hand, I'm pretty sure some of my fans who watch the podcast know that I've reiterated it a couple of times before that I was still in college learning traditional animation when the show was kind of like announced underground. People working in the industry knew that George is working on this revolutionary, high budgeted animated show to basically like reinnovate how the animated shows are being shown, and it was television before the streaming services. And but I didn't see the movie in theaters because I don't know. I kind of had the feeling that it's in theaters. They're gonna bring over the same very episodes and be included as a part of the first original season. I might as well just wait. And then there was this whole waiting period where George was deciding after he filmed the entire first season which network will have it. And obviously it showed up on Cartoon Network first, and that's how I started watching it. And from the first ground up, I was sold, man. I thought, to me, as somebody who had much higher expectations from the films themselves, and this is now 2 years after the Revenge of the Sith, where for a little while we didn't even know if we're going to get any new stuff. And now we get this new animated show. And to me, it just swept me away, man. From its writing to very emotional moments there, from what George was trying to do, play around with a cast of main characters, but then kind of show you throughout, lead you, the audience, throughout the series and show you that its true heroes are the clones. That was very different and exciting in the ways that I didn't expect at all.
Yeah, well, bouncing off that, I will say that I actually surprised. This may surprise a lot of people because I'm such a prequels fan. When I first watched Revenge of the Sith, I didn't like it. Now I was quite
Right.
young, I wasn't even really a teenager then, so I was just a little kid, and I didn't like it. I'd watched Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and the original trilogy on repeat on VHS tape, so I didn't actually like Revenge of the Sith that much. Then when it came out on DVD, I then got it. It was the first, that and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the first two DVDs I ever owned. I remember that. And so I had those, and those are very far apart, but still. But I remember having that, and then I finally kind of got into Revenge of the Sith when I rewatched it and things. And then the Clone Wars came out, and I was like, oh, cool. And then I went to that, and I was like, no.
Interesting.
But at the time when the film came out was when The Force Unleashed came out, which obviously is basically the polar opposite of the spectrum when it comes to the way it presents certain narratives and powers and things like that. But then I got into the series years later. I think I didn't get into the series until I think it was around the time Rebels was out. I think when the Star Wars had its resurgence.
2014, 15, somewhere there.
Yeah, around that time. I think I started watching Rebels and Clone Wars, or it was Clone Wars just before Rebels came out. Because I remember at one point researching like what made a lightsaber red. And it was the Legends continuity is obviously it's a synthetic crystal. And then when the canon changed, it then became we don't know. And then eventually Charles Soule's a comic thing, but the comic wasn't out by that time. So I remember looking it up because of I think something in Clone Wars pre the canon reset and being like, oh, it's synthetic crystals. And then looking again at another point and being like, wait, I thought I remember it saying, and that's how I figured it. That's how I found out about the canon reset, which is quite an interesting tangent into Ahsoka that as a character kind of changing things and my kind of re-entry into Star Wars at the same time.
So it shows a huge anchor point.
Yeah, 100%.
And obviously, Ahsoka was one of many new cast members in that show. We were introduced to a slew of different female and male characters. But was she a tough sell to you specifically as Anakin's student? Because, it takes place between episode 2 and Revenge of the Sith, right? So in that small time frame, I've heard all kinds of different opinions of that from the fans throughout the years. What was your take on it?
I think that as someone who grew up with the prequels, I'm always okay with dialogue not being said in the spur of the moment. Being, people go, why wouldn't Anakin mention Ahsoka and Revenge of the Sith? And it's like, there are times he probably could have, maybe, but his story was very insular and very focused, and he kind of had the blinkers on for everything else. Like, there's a lot of things in his life he didn't mention. So and also, as we know with the way the prequels are, even though there is some dialogue that links in with the prequels from the original trilogy, there's a little bit that's a bit like, what Darth Vader's told about its ancient religion, and it's like 19 years old, and you're like, is anything that's less than 2 decades old ancient? Probably not. So it's tiny little things like that. So I've always just kind of been like, he was stressed in the situation. I never had an issue with that element. Obviously, I think the thing that everyone was thinking was, is she going to die? That was kind of the big thing in there, is like, is she going to die in this? Because she doesn't appear in Revenge of the Sith. And I think for me, what I've tried to do with Star Wars, with the canon or with Legends, whenever I read some content, I try not to, when I consume it and I'm not a fan of some of the contents of it, such as some of elements of Jar Jar and Phantom Menace and certain other parts, I try not to think about it when I'm kind of escaping in the world. I try not to go, that's bad writing, that sucks, it doesn't fit. And I just go, God, these characters are acting weird in this moment in time. And how in my own head canon do I kind of make sense of that? Like,
so you moderate, basically.
Kind of, yeah. I just go, this is the world. Whatever they've kind of written, that is what's happened. So whether or not you think, would that happen in real life with the person? We've all had situations where you have a whole day with someone, you go, I never even mentioned this to them. And I was going to, you know what I mean? You see a family member and you go, oh, I'm going to tell them about this thing I know they're going to really like.
The moment didn't call for the situation to name that person specifically.
Yeah, I think Obi-Wan maybe would have been the one more likely to kind of mention, but I think he was kind of somewhat distracted. And I think the point of Revenge of the Sith is everything happened so quickly and everyone was so busy all the time. It kind of, no one grouped together. So no one could really, like, Palpatine would definitely not mention Ahsoka because it'd be like, that's a potentially way of losing Anakin. And then Obi-Wan, he also knows this is a real soft spot for Anakin and that he's against the Jedi Order. Best not pick up, point out the apprentice that left because of all of our like misgivings and us accusing her of like murder and bombing a temple. And she's like, oh, that wasn't me. And everyone's like, I don't believe you. And Anakin's the only one. So the only time I think Anakin could have said it would be like, I'm so frustrated with the council. This is what happened with Ahsoka. Why they're not making me the master? Is it because of what happened with Ahsoka? That would probably be the only thing I'd be like, yeah, he'd probably say something there. But again, maybe we didn't see the dialogue that was there. Maybe, who knows, his mind wasn't on it. So yeah, I just said the same thing 3 times with 3 different examples, but yes.
Guys, we're 10 minutes into the podcast and I already feel inferior because I have not thought of all the detail there. But to be serious for a second, I understand exactly what you're doing. You kind of compartmentalize and you kind of reduct what stuff, because obviously, look, when you have a franchise that has been going on for 40 plus years, you're obviously going to run on your own storytelling. And in an effort to create something new and exciting, you kind of sort of have to plug in or work around, soak around your original material to make it fit. And I totally agree with the majority of your points. I was like, okay, for me, in the beginning, it was a bit of a stretch that Anakin would have a student, because at the same time, I was able to overcome it and very quickly say, you know what, I'm in for the ride. I want to enjoy more Star Wars. I want the stories to be gripping and heartfelt, and so be it if I have to forego the fact that there is no place for her to be in actual movies. I'm fine with that. And there's actually, to segue into the next question, there's a very interesting video. Obviously, most of it is pulled from behind the making of the Clone Wars show, where Dave Filoni extensively talks about the show, how things were created. And he talks about how she was conceived, how George Lucas basically gave him an assignment. But obviously, fans are torn apart. There are pro-Dave Filoni fans. There are other people, kind of conspiracy theorists, who believe he somehow, hijacked the Clone Wars show from George Lucas, because at one point, George Lucas openly states that he's kind of like, look, I just sit behind there and I kind of like supervise the general thing, but yeah, I'm kind of my hands off at this point. But do you think that Ahsoka is purely Dave Filoni's invention, or was George Lucas also responsible to contributing to her?
I definitely think both, even on the basis, if I go so far as, I don't think many things in Star Wars are attributed to one person. One example, who can think of Luke Skywalker without Mark Hamill? Who can think of Han Solo without Harrison Ford? And it's not just the extent of, in A New Hope, George did a huge amount of the heavy lifting, huge amount. He created the universe, no doubt. He wrote lots of different pieces of information. He kind of had this, but it's documented that his wife helped him like edit parts of the film and script editing and things. And also certain actors refused to say certain lines because they're like, that's too silly, George. We have to try and figure out other things. Mark Hamill has famously said that. And there are little elements of just things that maybe need to be tweaked. And my biggest criticism of the prequels is George Lucas was allowed to go gung-ho and no one said, maybe you should tweak this bit a little bit. Everyone's like, George, you made one of the best sci-fi franchises ever in 3 films. How on earth do you do that? You matched Star Trek when we talk about it, yet you only were going for a few years. Here, have all the money and all the creative freedom. We're not even going to question anything you come up with. And then he was just like, oh, cool, I'll do this and this and this and this. And no one was there just to go, maybe wind this back a little bit.
Right.
So I think with Dave Filoni and George, I think one of the reasons that Dave Filoni works so well with George is because he understands the vision that George is going through and a lot of the core values, but he can interpret and add layers to it. The prequels were like unfiltered George Lucas. There were other people involved, don't get me wrong. The actors, Qui-Gon Jinn, I attribute a lot of his love for Liam Neeson. Obi-Wan, I think it's fantastic as Ewan McGregor. There are other people who maybe could have fulfilled those roles, but George was definitely the driving force. But even those things were a collaborative effort from those around. And there's probably people behind the scenes, costume designers, things like that. Ahsoka, as we think of her, like if someone says Ahsoka and the first thing you think of, do you think Rosario Dawson? Do you think Rebels? Do you think Clone Wars? And it's most likely you think animated in some way. Right. So it's like even the person who was the lead animator at that time formed different elements of what Ahsoka could be. So I think it's
excellent point.
Both at the same time, but it kind of, as it goes on, it becomes slightly more. And Ashley Eckstein, I imagine her input, not just what the character physically looked like, but how the character kind of spoke as the seasons go on. I think especially the character grows into itself because everyone involved with it can see where the character's growing to, and it makes it kind of expand out more in that regard.
Yeah, excellent, fantastic points. It's definitely a collaborative process. Even, the novelization, they came out after the original Star Wars movie, right? We got the first spin-off novel, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, where authors started also contributing to the expanded universe. And many authors and comic book artists that you and I get the pleasure of interviewing, even they mentioned, I got to speak with a couple of legends writers that speak about that earlier in a time period when they started releasing books. A lot of the stuff had to be conceived of. Obviously, George Lucas signed off on this. Obviously, it's his baby, and he was kind of like overseeing and guiding the ship. He's the captain, right? But they were adding elements to it, which without those contributions, without those unique perspectives, without, Michael Stackpole's, X-Wing series or Timothy Zahn's Throne trilogy, Star Wars would not be what it is today. Yes, let's flesh it, but let's give credit where credit is due.
And I love the Essential Legends covers, by the way. So I'm slowly, each audiobook I listen to, I slowly buy it. But I didn't mean to interrupt your point, but I would say a good comparison I'd say to people was Lord of the Rings and Peter Jackson.
Yeah.
Tolkien made Lord of the Rings possible, but Jackson put his spin on it to make those movies so incredible. And if you had the wrong director, it would go wrong. And I think Dave Filoni and George Lucas, the Clone Wars movie, in my opinion, is not very good. I think it's the worst piece of Star Wars content in the modern canon, in honesty with you. But I don't think it's so bad no one should ever watch it necessarily. I'm just like, be prepared. You can watch series 1 of the Clone Wars and get the general gist, and it's aimed at a younger audience. But that was Dave Filoni and George Lucas finding their feet a little bit as well. And that's something I think a lot of strong believers in George Lucas also fail to kind of look in, like acknowledge a little bit. Like Dave Filoni and George Lucas are incredible together, but they haven't always been perfect. They've had to grow, and that's what I think works with them both.
Excellent point. Yeah. But also coming back to, who is behind it all and seeing George's guiding hand in it, where I can definitely see Ahsoka projecting George Lucas's ideas is that she is very much in essence, a classical heroic type. She's unlike Luke Skywalker because she goes through a different sets of struggles and personal conflicts that Luke does. But it's that same old timeless tale of a young person asserting themselves in a larger universe, in a larger galaxy, finding their place, anchoring themselves, facing adversity, becoming strong, and becoming this very, very pivotal role model for a lot of kids that grew up on Clone Wars animation. So why you and I were both huge fans of Dave Filoni, he's able to understand where George was going with this and continue that thread that was established thousands of years before George, as George himself cites all of his, sources of inspiration. And both together, they kind of continue that trend and show you. So you see George in there, you see Homeric heroes there, you see the classical motifs. It's all in there. But I wanted to switch gears a little bit here and now we talked about the deeper, content that what she stands for. We'll touch upon that as well. But from the visual perspective, from her character design in the Clone Wars show and her later evolutions in the Rebel show, which we'll also discuss, and live action as well. What made her a compelling character to you visually?
I liked the fact that she was a Togruta because I think, apart from Shark T, we don't really get much Togruta. There's none to my recollection in the original trilogy. If there are, the background characters.
Yeah.
And with that, I like having a main that is non-human. We've got Chewie, and Chewie's amazing, don't get me wrong, but you can't understand any of Chewie's dialogue. You've got the droids who, 3PO is kind of human, you know what I mean? And then R2 is more aligned with sort of Chewie and things. So you do get like side characters, maybe a line of dialogue here or there, but in the original trilogy, there's not that much. You get like villains like Jabba, but you haven't got a main character like that. And I really like having aliens as mains. I think it's just quite an interesting choice. And she's very striking to see that. And also the head Montrolls, as the series goes on, when they update the animation style, they change them. They make them slightly longer, generally a bit thinner, and they slightly adapt her face. So as the animation style gets better, as the show finds its footing more, she also grows more as a character. And I know Series 7 came out a lot later than the rest of them because of the preconceived cancellation. But when you see from Clone Wars movie to Series 1, 2, then every couple of series it sort of changes, Series 7 and Rebels, as you see that kind of change, it grows organically with her, but the stripes on her Montrals, I really like the visual element of that with the color of her orange skin. Like, I just think a lot about her has got this balancing contrast about it. It's got a lot of blue, which is quite a neutral color. It's got a lot of white, which is another quite neutral color, and then later resembles her purified lightsaber. And then you've got the orange, which isn't quite red and what is associated with the dark side of the Force in this, but it's like a fire. it's like an Anakin kind of thing. Anakin
Hmm.
has that fire. She takes that. She has the fire of Anakin with almost the purity of Obi-Wan, and
Yeah.
that's what I kind of think the color scheme is subtly nodding to in certain ways.
Yeah. Well, I really gravitated towards her because I'm very much into character design, whether it's like video games or animated shows or even live action. Because when you start contemplating on the thought that went into costume making, into makeup, into designing a character, 3D model, it's just really, really enjoyable to behold the artistry of it. And I really enjoyed Ahsoka's small, tiny frame. She's basically like early teen. She's like straight out of adolescence. She's this young person, but she's such an ass kicker. She's agile. She has a very small frame. And I really enjoyed the fact that she wasn't trying to be what I often find in modern entertainment and just happening in the culture is this tenacity to make women in every sense of the word equals to, she's equal. She's not this lady boss, super muscular esque. She has different characteristics that suits her. And her, it all the attributes that she has makes her only better and more interesting in that way. And to see a smaller frame person like this that has to rely on the Force, it's such an interesting contrast to her male master Anakin. He's physical and he's powerful, but by the end of where the characters start up and where they end up, could you really say that Anakin is stronger than her? Not really, because these characters draw on something that is beyond them, right? They reach out to this Force and the wisdom of the Jedi and the teaching. And to me, it was so much more valuable. And even when you look at her skin color, and 2008, when the show aired, the discussion about race and skin color and representation was completely different. Things didn't feel like they were forced down your throat. Like, oh, we need to do a character, be a specific character. You know what? She's orange, dude. Deal with it. She's a teenager. Deal with it. Rocking these two lightsabers. What I really appreciate about her, she didn't need to emulate Anakin to stand on her own and be as much as of value to the show and to the audience as Anakin was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and it makes me think of Darth Azana from the Bane trilogy, which is, in my opinion, the best Legends literature. I've not read it all, not read all Legends literature, but that for me is not only some of the best Legends literature, but some of the best literature in Star Wars. Period. I think Drew Karpyshyn's Bane trilogy.
I was really happy with you, like reading this stuff
so
and like, yeah.
It literally it's some of my favorite Star Wars writings. I see that in the High Republic are amidst my favorites. But in that you have a character Darth Zana, and with that she has a similar journey. And one thing, this is a spoiler, but it's been out for many years. It's a spoiler for the last novel, and it is she beats Bane, but she doesn't beat him by raw strength. She beats him by her knowledge of the Force and dark side magics, and she has as powerful, if not more powerful, ways of combat without it just being the same brute strength. Yeah. And I'm fairly sure Anakin or Obi-Wan or someone says to Ahsoka at some point, you can't just use your brute strength. You have to use different ways. It might even be Anakin in the Tales of the Jedi short where he's teaching her to do the spin move constantly. It's something like that. He says, you need to be better than me, and you need to rely on other things that I can't rely on and things, and you need to be agile. And it makes for a character who learns different lessons in a slightly different way, but still has similar core values of what her master's trying to teach her while learning for herself, being independent. And even when you see them fighting, you're not just watching two people do the same moves next to each other. There's moments they have similar moves, especially at the start where she's learning, but then they adapt off each other in ways. And you see that as they fight together. So it also makes two slightly different but linked together fighting styles, which I appreciate.
Yeah. Before we touch on specific episodes in the Clone Wars show and move on to Rebels, I wanted to ask, what do you feel were some of the qualities or personality traits that she projects to the audience that serve as a great role model?
Making mistakes is a big one. I think that's something which is shown in Star Wars, sometimes to very extreme degrees, Anakin Skywalker, for example. But Star Wars, a lot of it is about lessons. That's a lot of it is teachings. It's almost like Yoda is trying to teach people by these crazy space stories, and it's all about learning this, that, and the other. And every character kind of has to learn something the hard way or the easy way. Rarely the easy way. And I think that when she makes mistakes, she owns up to them and she
Hmm.
grows as a character and as a human and as a young person. Because when you're a teenager, your formative years are basically you getting more freedom, and therefore you have more freedom to make more mistakes. And
Hmm.
when you make these mistakes, you learn how to overcome them, and hopefully you have a support network around you to let you progress and develop as a person. And I think Anakin, for his failings, does work in that role. He's a bit hard on Ahsoka at times, but she's the kind of person who needs that drive and that push. So she is willing to go that extra mile if she's pushed and supported by Anakin. And he still cares deeply about her. He still wants her to, be the best she can and will protect her. But also, he's like, you can achieve greatness, but you need to push yourself in those things and listen to me. And
Hmm.
I think that's a really important lesson for especially young people to learn when watching a show like this, and seeing her grow throughout the seasons really helps that.
Yeah, and I could say that she definitely rubs off on her master, Anakin. She could sort of emulate. He's almost like an older brother or father figure to her. And what Anakin does, she kind of repeats and replicates. That's how she learns the world around her. So there's very much great passion and even pride in her at times. But what I really, really enjoyed in the show is that she's able to rein in her pride. Yeah. And see, and always return to the source of the Jedi teachings and centering herself and understanding what there's many episodes where she's in the heat of passion. Remember, like in the first episode, I think when she's with Master Yoda, she's standing on top of that separatist tank and she's like just kicking ass. And Anakin tells her, "This is not the mission parameters. Get back." And she emotes, but then at the same time, she's able to suppress herself and get back in step. And she always comes back from the brink. And I thought it was just such a powerful message for a younger audience to say, like, look, it's okay sometimes to be angry. It's okay sometimes to be less than perfect. But then what makes makes up for a great character, a great personality, is that for you acknowledging that, understanding where you were wrong, and going back to that, place of humility and being able to look back at yourself from a third person view and say, this is what I was wrong. And Master Yoda was teaching me here, and Obi-Wan had a comment there. And even Anakin, he's so admirable and so compassionate and so lovable in the show that he also helped me, to feel the tragedy and fall of Anakin, but also you see how much of an influence he was on this younger person, that he molded her into something special and great. Like without Anakin, I don't think she would have become what she was.
And I agree completely. I think that Anakin, during the Clone Wars, is an amazing master.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if outside of the Clone Wars, he would have been such a great master, if you know what I mean, because he's very power and battle driven and he's not as patient. And during the Clone Wars, you don't necessarily need to learn those lessons quite so much as they kind of had to learn pre-Clone Wars. In books like Master and Apprentice, you have those moments of what Jedi acted like when they weren't at war overtly. We get a degree of that in the High Republic as well. So we get a lot of that in the High Republic. So it's kind of seeing like how Anakin works. He works as a general. He works as a wartime mentor to someone who is willing to learn and willing to fight. And also, she is very gifted in the Force as well, which does help, I think.
Mm-hmm. What were some of your favorite scenes, maybe, or moments, or particular episodes from the Clone Wars with Ahsoka?
So I think the undeniable one is one of the peak pieces of not only Star Wars, Clone Wars content, but also just Star Wars content in general, is the temple bombing arc with Barriss Offee. I think that's a pivotal moment. It's an anchor point, I describe it, in Ahsoka's life. It completely changes the trajectory of what she does.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously she gets blamed for something, and the only person who believes her is Anakin. Only person. Obi-Wan's a bit on the fence about it, but she gets framed for bombing the Jedi Temple. And it's just like, it's such a powerful episode of her really learning, like, what is it like if all my entire support network is taken away from me? How do I survive from that? And that makes her even stronger because obviously she leaves the Order. We see in, Clone Wars Series 7 and things, how that kind of transpires. And in the book Ahsoka, we also get that as well. And Tales of the Jedi get a bit. So we get to see her change in that regard when that moment happens. So that's an incredible few episodes in there. There's a one-off episode where she gets captured. I think it's on Trandosha. It's around the Wookiees. I think she meets Chewbacca.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting one. And then also the Younglings arc. She's not in those that much, but in the Younglings, just her dealing with younger characters. Like there's quite a few episodes like Lightsaber Lost as well that are very centric to her as a character. but I think it's the ones where normally the worst stuff that happens to her is my favorite, unfortunately. The Mortis arc, when she gets
Yeah.
like kind of consumed by the dark side, I know they kind of all forget it at the end anyway, but like in that kind of realm,
Mhm.
I like it. I like it when some of my favorite characters go through really horrible stuff, which sounds really bad, just because it
No, it's
often
good.
makes them
That's where
grow
the
and
fun
you get the
stuff is.
pressure. Yeah,
Yeah.
you get the pressure on their personality and
Mhm.
put those in those situations. What are some of your favorite moments of the Clone Wars with her?
Well, definitely, you mentioned a couple of them. Definitely the temple bombing one, obviously. That's a huge one. The lightsaber lost also, because when she interacts with Dara Sanubi and his manner of teaching him, which is kind of Yoda-like, but there's still... It's an adventure heist episode where they're in the middle of the adventure, and that's where the lesson takes place. So I found it really, really enjoyable. And it's a quieter episode of just learning and perseverance. Like there's high octane action scenes of chases, but there's also moments where she has to pause. She constantly has to pause for a moment and retrospect and figure out what's going on. But one that I really, really enjoyed was where Ahsoka Tano couples with a Luminara's student, Barriss Ophion, on Geonosis, and when they're stuck in that tank, which was also, seems to be like an intimate and a small scene, but it's brimming with heart and soul of this character and her personality, that for some reason when I was watching it, I believed that she will always remain good. She has this unbending will for goodness and sacrificing herself for the greater good. I was like, oh my God, I couldn't help but, compare myself versus younger children who are watching the show for the first time and being exposed to Star Wars. Like, oh my God, they're going to find treasure trove of good qualities in a person. This is what you need to be like. And it was fascinating, man.
And then obviously season 7 of the Clone Wars, I think, is
Yeah.
probably that, and the temple bombing arc is top tier Ahsoka. Like the finale, the last 4 episodes of Clone Wars is just some of the best.
The closing shot of the series finale, it's some of the most evocative stuff I've seen in science fiction. It's just her standing in the grave of these clones was just mind-blowing. Rebels came out in 2014, and we saw the return of Ahsoka Tano. Less than a prominent role, but she is in a couple episodes there as Fulcrum, right? The secret agent working for the first Rebel cells. Were you expecting her return?
So I think I was. I knew she was coming into it at some point. I didn't suspect that she was Fulcrum. I didn't specifically get that. However, when you see online now, you go, well, the symbol for Fulcrum was like the white lines on her face, like her face markings. I didn't explicitly expect it. No, I didn't. I thought she would come back in animation at some point, and I thought it would be maybe in Rebels somewhere, or they make another series. But when she showed up, it was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think because does Rex show up first, or does he show up after?
That's a good question. I believe he shows up before. Remember that in that episode where Ezra goes to that desert planet where they're on that Republic tank. That's before they meet with Ahsoka, right?
I think it might be after, because she tells. No, she tells. Maybe she tells.
She guides them there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a character that they come across, and I think it's a few episodes before the Ahsoka reveal, and it kind of made me think maybe, but I wasn't overly sure on it. But when she came into the series, I was like, I need all of it. And then I said, but the series finale of series 2 is some of the best Star Wars that exists. I keep saying a lot of stuff that Ahsoka in is some of the best Star Wars that exists, and that is true, because she's in a good percentage of, especially on screen stuff. She's in a lot of amazing stuff.
Yeah. I was sort of surprised to see her, because I wasn't prepared for Star Wars after the Disney acquisition. I wasn't prepared for this Marvel kind of like setup where you have characters traveling from show to show and they're trying to bind it all together. I thought, okay, the Clone Wars was its own show and it's done and we say goodbye to it. Then maybe perhaps, I'm not closing the book on it, maybe in 10, 20 years later down the road, they will have more stories to tell in the Clone Wars and maybe somehow she'll return. But now, Rebels was the first testing ground of what Disney content would be like. This is before sequel trilogy. This is before any books came out. The first content that we got were Marvel comics and the Rebels show. And I was really enjoying it in this purest sense. Like, okay, this is an entirely new cast. New setting, awesome. Let's go with it. I enjoy it this way. I love parting ways. There's something that I really had an impact on me, like the Clone Wars show, and moving on to something else, because I can enjoy it here, and it's self-contained entity here, and then I can move to another show. And when she appeared, it was like, who is this Fulcrum? Is this from another show? And then it's a huge surprise, followed by like, yeah, dude, that totally makes sense. They're both animated shows, and we're not that far off in the timeline. Yeah, I'll go with it. But here's the thing. Additional story oftentimes clashes with the original trilogy narrative, right? Because as we mentioned earlier, inadvertently, when you have a 40-plus-year-old franchise, you're going to run on your own storytelling. But is it conceivable that a powerful Jedi, no other than Vader's own apprentice, survived the Jedi Purge and lived into the rebellion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it works because Clone Wars made after the fact of it being explained is kind of like, that's how we get away with it. But I think that with Star Wars and being, there were 10,000 odd Jedi, Legends did it, canon does it, where they always want to be like, there was only one Jedi, or maybe there was two, three. No, there was like 10, 12, 15. There were 10,000 Jedi. So even if 100 are alive, that's still a lot of people. It just is constantly creeping up. So I feel like her surviving is fine. She could go. Her being a Togruta probably helped, I think, just due to the Empire's somewhat insinuated and then also less insinuated, more overt racism of other races. So in literature, it's delved into a little bit more, and I know in Legends they tackle it a bit deeper with Palpatine specifically, but I think her race helped her kind of blend in. I know there's the book Ahsoka, which worked and things, but the Empire was so big and they were doing so many things. And if you think about how many planets there are in the galaxy, there's somewhere she could have hidden and that sort of thing for a while. I think my biggest issue isn't that she survived the Purge. My issue is how many Jedi are actually around when Yoda says there's one more hope and things.
It's a good question.
And it's like with Rebels, I won't specifically spoil, but in Rebels it gets explained, and I'm like, you know what, fair enough. And with Ahsoka, it's like, well, technically she doesn't call herself a Jedi, and it's like, okay. And then it's like, oh well, Quinlan Vos might also be alive at that time, and you're like, okay, right. And then Cal Kestis maybe too. It's like, right, how many more? Sorry, are there? And I think the only real crux of it is just Yoda's dialogue, I think, in the original trilogy. I think aside from that, meh. I mean, but I've said before, like, I'm an absolute sucker for Order 66 stories. I know some people getting sick of them. I'm not. Oh, Keller and Beck, that's another one who obviously survived. So I'm like, I'm not sick of them. I want to see every single character's Order 66 story, but I don't want them all to be alive by the time of Return of the Jedi. If we get more stories crammed in between, A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back and Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi, like we've been getting in the comics, which I've been enjoying, I want to see, okay, can we have some, if Jedi survive to them, we need to cull them a bit more, I think. But Ahsoka, yeah, I think she's, as we know she is, but yeah, I can believe that. She's probably one of the most skilled, and she was good at blending in, so long story short.
I would argue she was basically as skilled as Anakin in her prime. Yeah. I mean, if you go literally and just like read word for word and explicitly interpret Yoda's words at face value, technically speaking, the last survivor of the Order 66 possibly died like 25 minutes before Yoda tells Luke, "When gone am I, the last of the Jedi will you be," technically speaking. Yeah. But when you sort of interpret the original trilogy for many years that it existed without any material touching that stuff, I personally, as a kid in the 80s, had a feeling that the Jedi are long gone, and Obi-Wan Kenobi living on Tatooine is the remnant of that past religion, and Vader among them. And we didn't distinguish between Sith or Jedi, because there was no such concept as Sith. There was just the Jedi as far as the movies were concerned. And I felt that when Yoda stated that the last Jedi will you be, there's this sort of a nostalgic note there in his words, and he's saying everything that we fought for during the Clone Wars, it's gone. So you could tell.
That's a good point. And other
Hmm.
people living on can be not like Quinlan Voss. I imagine he's not going to be so strict to the Jedi teachings if he's lived that long. We saw Cal Kestis. I've not finished Jedi Survivor, but in Jedi Fallen Order and stuff, he does a lot of killing, and he gets kind of mentioned a little bit. Like you are quite violent for a Jedi. You do speak with your lightsaber quite a lot. And it's like he's
Hmm.
trying to kind of be a Jedi, but he's also kind of not. And then once again, no spoilers, but Jedi Survivor, it's like there's more force sensitive characters surviving.
Here's also a moment here to contemplate. Um, Ahsoka, her role in the Rebels basically to go after her arch nemesis, Admiral Thrawn, and then to figure out his whereabouts. But she's also investigating into this mysterious new figure, the new henchman at the Emperor's side, this Vader. Did Ahsoka not understanding who Vader was at the beginning puzzle you?
I think it was more denial. I think it was
Mm,
more she felt a twinge in the force, but Anakin was just covered in so much hate and dark side anger, suffering, all that sort of things.
interesting.
She was like a really weird way I describe it is almost like if you got a sweet you really like and you just got a little chip of it and then you put it in like chocolate or something, you'd have it and you'd finish it. You go,
Hmm.
there's something a little bit
Hmm.
weird in that. And that's kind of what I think she felt. She's like, that couldn't. She had that moment where she's a little bit like, what? I never found out what happened to Anakin. There's something about this seems familiar, but it wouldn't be Anakin because he's the most compassionate, nice person ever. He would never be anything like that. So I think a big moment for her is when she has like a vision. I think it's in one of my favorite episodes of season two of Rebels. Actually, is not just the finale, but it's a few episodes before the finale. And she sits down in the Lothal Temple when they lift it further up and they go further deeper
Hmm.
into it, and they each have their own visions. And that's when she's confronted with it, and it's like you have to look at this. And I think that wasn't her being like, "Oh my god, it's Anakin." Her being like, I have to accept it is
Yeah, that's an excellent
somehow."
point.
Yeah,
That's an excellent point. It also reinforces the idea that the Jedi are not all powerful, and she can't just send somebody throughout eons and say, "Well, yep, yeah, that's definitely that little dark spot in the Force over here. Yeah, that's Anakin. He just veiled himself with the Vader's mask." There's still a moment of confusion there, but in her soul, not through the Force, in her heart, she feels but she already knows what's going on here. Uh, your favorite episodes or scenes in Rebels?
so the Jedi Temple one in Series 2 is great. I think the finale of Rebel Series 2, Twilight of the Apprentice, I think that is arguably the best piece of Star Wars content that exists. That scene, the whole thing. You've got Maul involved, who's incredible. Obviously, Sam Witwer, he's like my favorite personality in Star Wars. You've got Kanan, and he has this anchor moment to him as well. You've got Ezra, he learns an important lesson as well. You've got Sith stuff, which we barely have any of the in the canon. You get some incredible lightsaber fights. There's loads of them. You get the Darth Vader Ahsoka confrontation. You get Ezra trying to fight Vader. And it's one of the first times in the new canon where you really feel that absolute hopelessness of anyone trying to fight Vader.
Mm-hmm.
And Ezra's trying, and he's just getting destroyed. Vader's barely trying. And it's just got that incredible line where Vader's like, you know, Ezra's like, I'm not scared of you. And he's like, well, you will die braver than most. And it's like, that is amazing. Yes. And when Ahsoka knocks the mask off, all that sort of stuff, her emotional thing with Anakin, but she still was like, the right thing to do is I have to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so often I find in series where you've got the fall of someone and well, like it's not more common in zombie films, let's be honest, you know, where they think, oh, they're okay. Don't worry, guys. They were all messed up and weird and trying to kill me, but now they're not and they're okay. Or Evil Dead does it as well with the Deadites.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get you. Ahsoka didn't have that. She's like, the fact that you are has confirmed my fears to the I cannot deny this, and now I must kill you.
Yeah.
And she has that amazing line of I am no Jedi. So I love that. And the world between worlds is very interesting, but
Mm-hmm.
that's more about Ezra, I find. And then she has the thing with Thrawn a bit in season 4 of Rebels, but obviously she kind of leapfrogs. She's in series 2 quite a
Right.
lot,
Right.
not in series 3 at all. And then she's crops back up in series 4. So it's like she
Mm-hmm.
has her moments, but I think that Vader moment, I don't think anything's going to top that with anything she's going to do in the future. I'm sure we're going to talk about what she's going to do in the future and some interesting things, but I think that her fighting Vader is everything we've always wanted. And I also think that with the Kenobi series, I enjoy it. I know you aren't a fan, but the Obi-Wan Vader fight, as amazing as it is, it's literally a poor man's Ahsoka and Vader fight. Unfortunately, visually it looks amazing because live action. Don't get me wrong, and the aesthetic looks great.
Yeah.
But Ahsoka fought Vader first, did the whole helmet cutting off thing, more emotional in that regard, I find. So for me, that moment is just top tier Star Wars. That's what I'm here for.
Well, dear Star Wars ladies and gentlemen, fans, my spirit animal has spoken. those episodes are also my favorite ones, absolutely, with Ahsoka. And one quick mention I wanted to say is when she unveils herself for the first time and her first dialogue with Ezra Bridger, I almost felt it was signified a passing of the torch of the original Clone Wars series and its flagship character like Ahsoka. Here, you carry a torch now. She's passing the wisdom, the message, and the fight of the Jedi to this young person now, Ezra Bridger. It was a very small or touching moment. I believe they first spoke aboard Ghost, I think.
Yeah.
It was just a beautiful scene.
And I want to add as well, another amazing scene is when you've got Kanan and you've got Ezra fighting the Inquisitors. I think it's the second sister and the third brother, I think, or the fifth brother. And they're struggling to even not die when they're fighting them. And then Ahsoka comes in episode, it's one of the earlier episodes of series 2, and she fights both of them at once and easily beats them both. Easily. And she can just hold her own to such a high degree, a high standard. And that just reinforces as someone who, when people ask me watching Star Wars about Rebels or Clone Wars first, I actually generally recommend Rebels first, because I think it's more consistent storytelling. It's less arcs. It doesn't jump around plot timeline wise. And also, if you're a fan of the original trilogy, you're gonna connect more with Rebels than Clone Wars. And then once you're hooked with Rebels, because Rebels just gets better and better and better, and with Ahsoka's character, you get all these threads of oh, what was she like with Anakin? And I think that makes you like her more as a character if you start with Rebels and go back, even though you may not get some of the twists in air quotes. But I guess it's the eternal debate with Star Wars, where it's not like the MCU where it's linear. Right. When it's Star Wars, people argue, should you do the original trilogy first, prequels? What order do you watch what in, including the High Republic? Everything is just what order. So I always say Rebels first.
Yeah, good idea. The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett.
Yes.
We started off with the premise of a brand new show, The Mandalorian, the first live action Star Wars show. I clearly specifically remember Jon Favreau staking it all this brand new character that takes place after the original trilogy and is going to focus on all new worlds, all new characters, and no cameos from the known established characters. And of course, Rosario Dawson appears as Ahsoka Tano in both shows. There was quite a lot of debate and search for the right person, and a lot of excitement and a lot of angst from the fans. Oh my God, how are they going to do this classic, character from the show? Are they going to do the character justice? Before we start discussing Ahsoka's role in these two shows, I just wanted you and I just give us our personal impressions. Let's score Rosario Dawson's or general overall performance, her acting, her physicality, her looks. What did you think?
Out of 10, I'd say probably an 8 so far. 8 out of 10. Just on the basis that we've not yet had, maybe it's 7 to 8. I think she looks great, and I think her acting's amazing, but I just think she hasn't had the opportunity yet to experience real emotional moments quite yet. But I think when I saw her in Mandalorian and when I heard about her, I love her as an actress. I absolutely adore her. Whenever she's in anything, she always does an incredible job.
Yeah, I agree.
So I knew that she would be all in. I knew that I saw on Twitter when Clone Wars was, I think, before Series 7 was announced or anything like that. I think it was before Rebels. No, it was during Rebels. It was after Rebels Series 2. She tweeted a hashtag Ahsoka Lives. And I don't know if that was just how early on they were thinking about casting her. But I remember seeing that and then seeing her talk about the character a little bit and just that she loves the character and the idea of it. And so when I saw her being involved, I was like, if anyone's going to do a great job, I believe Rosario Dawson will. And she's so passionate about things. And then seeing her in the show, there was no part of me that didn't think it was Ahsoka. But I just think we need... With Ashley Eckstein, where she had so many emotional moments in the Clone Wars and Rebels in the aforementioned episodes, I think we saw her being a badass. in The Jedi, as in the episode in Mandalorian, and we didn't see much of her in Boba Fett, but we need those emotional moments.
Mm. I was a bit reserved because I'm a fan of Rosario Dawson, and she's already not a mega star, but a very well-established actress. When she was in quite a few things before the show. Just like I was reserved with Sam Jackson's role in prequels in Phantom Menace when he was announced. I was like, I don't know. I just don't like too popular of her characters kind of like dominating the role and being too much of themselves in it. But when she popped off in The Mandalorian first, I was completely wholesale just in it. 9 out of 10 for me, straight up. I'm like, yep, this is Ahsoka. At first, it was a little bit discerning that she's less emotive and not explicit, but I'm like, hold on a second, that's not a teenager Ahsoka. This is a Jedi equivalent of a Jedi Master even. She's completely in control of her faculties, but yeah, you got them right as Ahsoka. And I enjoyed her acting because I felt that out of all the episodes in Mandalorian, Mayfield, portrayed by Bill Burr, and her had the most emotional story arcs. More so than the main character in the show, because when she appears, you know, the child, Jedi child, the youngling, you know, Grogu is searching for that Jedi, and when she appears, and the moments that she spends with it, and the words that she passes on to it, they're not meaningless. They're not just there. We're gonna try to bring this character and just attempt to give her gravitas. She really did have. She anchored not only the episode but the entire show for me. She did not. She didn't feel like a cameo. And Dave Filoni, who directed the episode, he did a very smart thing of introducing her from the beginning and not dance around the bush and like, oh, she will unveil her throughout the episode. No, I'm gonna bring her in and spend the entire episode on dealing with her, and that played to the character's strength. From the visual perspective, I was sold. Her physicality was right. There's one or two maybe slightly awkward moments with the wire work when she jumps off the building. So I was like, you know what? It's still, they're in the process of figuring this out, on making an actress look like she's a martial artist expert. Very much like Quentin Tarantino was dealing with Kill Bill, right? She took an actress who's traditionally not a martial artist. He made her look badass. Here, a couple of, you know, kinks here and there, I thought they did an excellent job.
I was going to say, are we going to talk about her actual appearance then in A Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett?
Oh, absolutely. Let me see.
I apologize for cutting in because that's why
No, absolutely do. We're about to go there. I just had one or two questions that I still want to ask you. The first one is, we cannot talk about Ahsoka without the big elephant in the room. And it's obviously her Togruta horns, which got magically smaller in live action, and it completely destroyed the character, and I disowned it, and I'm not a Star Wars fan anymore. That was basically the reaction from some of the fans. Like, oh my God, they could have basically just like replicated what was in the animation. How could they desecrate an icon and an idol of Ahsoka's like horns, little things? How did you respond to, not to the fact, but how the fans were reacting to it?
Well, I didn't even notice it happened until I saw people online complaining about it. I was like, oh, and I saw pictures side by side. I was like, oh, okay.
Well, says it all.
I was literally like, it was about that much, I think. It was about an inch or two. And I was like, I didn't even notice. What difference? I don't know. I was like, maybe she was dehydrated that day. You know, maybe as Togrotas get a little bit older, maybe they go up a little bit more. Who knows? You know, I was like, I didn't even notice. When I saw it, I was like, oh, come on. I was like, that's like moaning when you watch a show that if someone's like in one scene has their, you know, shirt slightly lower than in another scene and things like that. Right. I know it is technically a physicality and stuff. Like people pointing out that's not a problem, but people moaning about it in the show, it's like it has to be about what the practicality is. And I know a lot of it was, first of all, she's just showing up in this cameo. Might have happened and no one would have enjoyed it. You know, but more likely it was like, right, we're kind of seeing where we go. This is the safest one. We can't spend hours and hours and hours and hours purely doing loads of different tests of this for a character that's only showing up once for the moment. I know that she said that with the Ahsoka show, they've improved those kind of elements a bit more, but it was kind of like what looks good as a character, but also what's, you know, they chose maturely to have physical effects instead of CGI. If they had CGI, it would have been perfect to the nanometer, but they didn't. They had it physically because it looks more real, but doing that brings its own
That's how I
challenges.
prefer it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, 100%,
Yeah.
especially with characters facing things in it a lot. And doing that, you have it so that she's moving around a lot, and they're
Yeah.
still testing out what kind of fabric, what they're going to be using, what material for the actual modules themselves. So yeah, when I saw people complaining online, I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, Disney ruined Star Wars. Can't even get the magic. They do it. They do it with a lot of stuff, and I'm like,
Mhm.
animation to live action's hard, and they've done a bloody brilliant job with Ahsoka.
Obviously, her look and style, the way she's like presented on screen, differs between animation and live action, right? Because as my professors were teaching me, the reason that animation exists is that you can do in it what you can't in live action. Otherwise, what's the point? Right? If you look at some animated work that looks exactly like grounded like reality, or rotoscoping techniques where it just basically draw, trace over film footage, what's the point of doing that?
Yeah.
Do you have a preference whether you like the live action or animated version more?
I think that the vast majority of people, myself included, generally prefer live action because your brain doesn't have to do quite as many steps to immerse you, even if it's only for a second or
Mm,
two. You know, when when I watch Clone Wars or animated stuff or read comics, I, you know, I do get emotional reactions to it, but it is still a clear cartoon. It's not reality. Live action just has that little extra punch to it, that way of drawing you in a bit more. And because of that, I think it adds a lot more weight. And I'm one who
mm,
I like my Star Wars dark. I like it when there's deep emotional moments, when there's intense fight scenes, when people die bluntly. And live action, because it's insinuated it's more for an older audience, you can get away with more. You can get away with less, rather, because in Clone Wars there was some horrendous stuff that happened in that. But because it's live action, it feels more mature. Like Andor is a good example of that. When you're in that show, it feels like a grounded, real world.
mhm,
When you see someone with wires or a little bit of CGI assistance doing big jumps, you kind of think, wow, that's amazing that someone's kind of doing that. The suspension of disbelief is less. So for me,
mhm,
although we haven't yet seen enough of live action Ahsoka to choose a specific favorite of performance wise, I
right.
think that live action generally, most people, I think, enjoy it more for the right things. There's the odd thing like crazy monsters sometimes. It's better just to have it all animated if it's a massive monster thing, because then you don't have to have really dodgy CGI. So I think it
Mhm,
depends what you want. But Ahsoka, I generally prefer live action.
mm. I'm on the animation side of things. I just felt it's really expressive and it's really over the top. And when you're telling this classical hero journey, animation is a perfect vehicle to be larger than life, because you're not supposed to replicate sober reality. You're supposed to embellish and fantasize and make it grand and super colorful. And even her like basic, those huge wide eyes that you obviously can't do with a live actor, something about her is just so expressive in animation. Key favorite moments, things you might have liked or criticized in either show, and then we'll move on to the Ahsoka show.
So Mandalorian, perfect. To be honest with you, there's nothing I would have added. Although I did criticize earlier about the emotional moments, and I take
Yeah.
your note of the ones with Grogu. That was not a criticism of the show, and there should have been emotional moments in there because it crammed it too deep. But the
Mm-hmm.
actual episode itself and her being in it, I thought they did it expertly. They
Mm-hmm.
did it enough to give you a general idea of who she was if you weren't familiar with animation, but
Mm-hmm.
made you interested enough to be like, oh, maybe I'll go back. But if people are like, I'm not going to watch animation, you didn't have to know. Then I feel like Book of Boba Fett, her being there was a waste of time. I think it was just that they were filming Ahsoka probably at the time. I was like, Rosario, can you just come in a day early and just come say hi? Because there was no value to her being there, really. Her just kind of keeping Mando company while he was waiting for Grogu to figure things out. And any dialogue she delivered could have just been delivered by Luke, I find. And that's my main criticism. So if you're going to be in there properly. And they're
Right.
not really going to add in really detailed Ahsoka stuff to do with the lore in the Book of Boba Fett because they know that people are going to have to find out from Ahsoka. So I think her Book of Boba Fett appearance, I was like, oh, cool, she's in the episode. And then the episode ended. I was like, oh, I'm glad I got to see her, I guess, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't see what she really added. So Book of Boba Fett was pretty weak, her appearance, but I found that her appearance in Mandalorian was absolutely incredible. What about you? Did you feel the same about Boba Fett?
Guys, I have a suspicion that I'm puzzled why you enjoy Kenobi show and I don't, because I feel like we're two clones from the same cloning facility. in regards to Ahsoka and 11, because you're like point by point, you're saying it all. I would say my favorite moment was actually not the story moment, even though I'm a story-driven person. I just felt that fight at the end with that Asian lady in The Mandalorian. I was just
with the spear made of Beskar.
In every single way. It was just so badass. To me, it was almost a perfect replication of anime-styled action done in live action, because when the Japanese try to do like with their Rurouni Kenshin live adaptations, it's too crazy for me. It's too over the top. When they just flail a Japanese katana like it was a Chinese sword, that's just too much for me. Here, it was tasteful, grounded, but very flashy in a way that I enjoyed more than I did in the prequel trilogy. Aside from Darth Maul, because everything with him is perfect. But later on, especially Revenge of the Sith, where you and I spoke earlier that we do enjoy the beginning of Kenobi versus Anakin fight, but later on, I believe it got too flashy for its own good. You enjoyed it, but I felt that this is what, if you want to do anime styled action in the feature films or TV shows, that's the way that you're supposed to do it.
I agree.
Mike, why don't we refresh our memory and quickly watch that dope-ass Ahsoka trailer?
I've only watched it once or twice, so I'm very excited. I think I saw it at Star Wars Celebration. I didn't get to see it when everyone else did it when it first aired, but I did. I did watch it in the queue the following day, later that day rather.
It was the first Star Wars trailer that I literally saw fully only today, because I thought it never existed. I thought it was only one trailer. Somehow I missed it in preparation for our podcast. So let me just share my screen here.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're gonna go right into it. I'm gonna bring the volume down a little bit.
Something's coming.
Yeah, as we're moving along through it, definitely pay attention to the locations, because I did have a couple of questions there. This first place with ruins, which sort of kind of reminds us of Tython, but we don't know for sure, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely somewhere like that, I think.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we meet Satine with those Loth cats. That's kind of cool.
Love it. And the vibro base. That looks like, well, obviously, I was going to say it's the Phantom.
Yeah. Of course, Hera, Chopper, these two new rogue, let's call them rogue Jedi elements. We don't know what they are. They're obviously up to no good, right?
Yep, and they got blood orange colored lightsabers as well.
Mm-hmm. We're lost how they got hold of those. And this location as well.
Things have changed.
I'm going to ask you about this one. Right, we got obviously Mon Mothma. A homeboy right here. Not fully revealed yet. We're not there yet.
Heir to the Empire.
Heir to the Empire. At first I thought it was going to be a younger Leia, and then of course...
We have to prepare for the worst.
Okay. Boom. It's going to be action galore at the very least, man. There's no way this show will not deliver. We got a little bit of Ezra.
Another Inquisitor fight.
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be so much of it.
Yeah. Boom. Okay.
Oh, Professor Hu Yang as well. Forgot about that.
Yeah. And then a cool stance, and that's where we end.
And then the vision at World Between Worlds kind of symbolism in the background as well.
Right, which a lot of people paid attention to, right? All right, I'm turning it off. I'm back to seeing your handsome chap face. Stop sharing the screen. There we are, back to normal.
There we go. Wow, what a ride.
Yeah. Pretty damn exciting. A lot of stuff is going on. Obviously, this is going to be a show helmed by no other than Dave Filoni. The trailer is almost subliminally marketed as heir to the Empire, as Return of the Grand Admiral Thrawn. How
familiar
you are with the original Thrawn trilogy from Timothy Zahn?
Well.
Let's tell the audience.
So, first of all, let's see behind me. My camera's not mirrored, so people might be able to see it. My camera's quite low res, but here I've got the Thrawn trilogy, which is the canon Thrawn trilogy.
Right.
Okay. I have now ordered the Heir to the Empire Essential Legends trilogy. In fact, it's been dispatched, so it should. I was hoping it'd get it today, but it hasn't. I've been listening on audiobook. Basically, a little thing with me is I read the High Republic books physically and the comics physically. And then I listen to almost all the Legends stuff on audiobook. And I was like, you know what? I'll buy an Audible thing for a year at a trial, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I'll do that. And then I won't need to buy so many books. And I enjoyed Legends so much, I can't resist not having the books. So then I started buying the Bane trilogy and Shatterpoint, Rogue Squadron, and also I've got some more as well. So
the
I've been buying
indoctrination has started.
It has. And I love the Essential Legends collection. I love all the artwork for them. It's amazing. And it's just a nice, cheap way to get. I love, obviously, hardcovers. I do for a lot of my books, get the hardcovers, but paperback sometimes is great as well. So I've been listening to Heir to the Empire, even though in the UK, you can't get the audiobook anywhere.
Right.
I've still been listening to it. So I'm 20 minutes from the end of Heir to the Empire, the book. And I've yet to start the other two, but I have got them in my queue. So I have actually got now an understanding of how Thrawn was in Heir to the Empire. I've read all 3 of the Thrawn canon books from the first Thrawn trilogy. I've not yet started the Ascendancy trilogy. And then obviously I know him from Star Wars Rebels as well. So Heir to the Empire, the book itself, I know everything bar the last few chapters. And then I have not yet read the other 2, but I'm trying to before the Ahsoka show.
If we make a case that animation is on a lower tier of canonical, or let's say widely popular among like general Star Wars fandom than live action, how do you feel about transplanting a major legacy character like Thrawn and changing him from being Luke's main arch nemesis to Ahsoka's arch nemesis?
I'm all for it. Oh God, sorry, bang the mic. What I'm always wanting is, with the canon legends thing, you and I have both discussed it. One of the core values you and I both agree on with Star Wars is that we can appreciate both continuities. They both have their own merits and they both have their own pitfalls. And I think that Dave Filoni is one of those people who is trying, and the High Republic authors to a degree as well, they're trying to combine elements of the Legends continuity with elements of the canon continuity to create something new. One thing I hear from the more toxic Legends fans is things like Disney are ruining this, Disney are ruining that, blah, 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 blah. Why didn't they just use the source material, blah, blah, blah. You'd never make those people happy. They've made their mind up. They're not going to enjoy Disney Star Wars. You can't convince them unless you create the greatest show ever in it. And then they go, oh yeah, everything sucks apart from Andor. Andor's great. But everything else Disney has ever created ever is the worst. But Andor's really good. But everything else is awful. But Andor's great. And so I think if they created Heir to the Empire and they made it shot for shot identical, you'd be getting, why did they make this? Well, the bother. Might as well just read the book.
Yeah.
If they make it slightly different, they go, why'd you change that? Maybe it's like, okay, rather than making an interpretation of a story that it already exists out there, a legend of a story, if you will, then we've got one amazing story of how Luke dealt with this foe when certain events transpired in that way. And we've also got, here's a way that this version of the foe went against someone else. The weird thing I find about Star Wars fans and their criticisms of characters, the differences between the canon and Legends continuities, is every single other franchise of this size, like Marvel and DC, a lot of comic related things, they have like hundreds of versions of the same characters fighting different people. The amount of Spider-Mans, the amount of Batman, the amount of Superman, all of them different continuities, different variations, different interpretations. I'm all for it. When you love characters, you love events, why would you not want to see more interpretations of certain events that occur? How many times have we seen the Batman fight the Joker or the Batman fight any of his rogue gallery? We've seen it quite a lot of times, yet we're still clamoring for those kind of films. You know, Wolverine, Logan is something you often speak about. You know, each Wolverine film is different to the other one, but they're all technically within the same universe to a degree apart from Logan, but it's all of them are actually different interpretations of Wolverine Logan as a character at different stages in his life. And I'm all up for that. I want it to be different. I want when they eventually remake Knights of the Old Republic into a movie series or into a TV series or anything. Yeah, I want some of the main story beats to be about, you know, the way Revan turns, and if we get the Darth Bane, you know, story. Obviously, I want to hear about the rule of two, and I'd like a Darth Zana. But if I don't get that, I'd rather have a different story that's good and well thought out than just a copycat of a book, because then I'd be like, well, why did I feel like I've been shortchanged reading the book? If you kind of see what I'm saying. I'm very interested by your perspective on it, though, because you've got such more of a rich connection with Legends.
I'd have to say I'm totally up for it, but it needs to be done right. You know, I did enjoy what they did with Thrawn in the Rebels show, but I do understand some of the criticism as well, where this perhaps was not the perfect platform to jumpstart this character because it's more family-oriented show. It did have darker moments there, but he's kind of sort of a little bit on the Disney-fied side. He kind of is. It's inescapable. It's there. I was surprised that they brought his henchman Rook in there. I was like, oh my God, he's there too. But overall, in general, I was satisfied given the context. But I never understood the argument from working for over a decade in a local comic book shop in the Bronx area and hearing from Marvel and DC purists that, it's not how it is in the book. And my question always I would throw at people would be, why would you want a perfect replication of what you already have in the book replicated on TV? Because when you say this is the perfect version of Batman, this is how he's supposed to be, perfect by whom? The original author or 15 authors that contributed to this character? Because if you only stick with the original purist narrative, then you never get to hear his origin story, his background, or how Joker influenced him. It would be this basically riffing off same ideas over and over and over again and recycling them. The whole idea, the point of reinvigorating a franchise is having new talent come in and being able to experiment with it. And yes, I agree with some of our criticism that sometimes it doesn't work towards its advantage. Sometimes what people are doing to characters we cherish and love is not always the best idea because they don't seem to understand the dynamics or DNA of those characters and stories. That happens too. Let's not brush it off. But I'm all for it if it's done correctly. If it comes with understanding with the source, sort of what they did with X-Men, the First Class. And the reason I bring it up, because it's the origin story of the X-Men. I did get to read the original Stan Lee's comic book series. And what's wonderful about the film, it understands what makes that story and those characters tick. It's not that they're cool, mutant powers. It's not their flashy looks. It's what they go through. And the movie is able to touch on all of those core elements and reorganize them in a new, exciting way and just repackage it and give it to you. Like, am I watching a Star Wars experience? Well, hell yeah, I am. Is it exactly like the comic book? No, it's not. But you know what? As the fan whose mind is open, I was invested because it understands and honors the past, but now it consciously signals to you that I'm trying to do something different here.
Yeah, I agree completely. I always want different things. That's what I want. I don't want the same story beats repeated. That's my biggest criticism of the sequel trilogy is actually the repeated story beats. So completely agree with you there. We got a story of how Luke beat Thrawn, with Mara Jade, and obviously
we'll always have it. It's not going anywhere.
And they're redoing it. They literally, the Essential Legends collection is specifically doing more audiobooks, doing all that. Disney are literally spending money investing on re-releasing, or rather they're allowing that the publishers and things to do those things and release audiobooks and stuff. So, yeah.
So I asked you to pay a little bit of attention to the different settings or locales that we're getting in the trailer, right? We see ancient ruins in the beginning. Then we see a bit of Lothal. We see a place which reminded me of architecture to Bespin, but it's grounded because you could see some planet surface in the background. What would you like to see in terms of different exotic locations or setting in Ahsoka?
I mean, Lothal is probably the main one because obviously there's the idea that Ahsoka is basically Rebel Series 5, which I'm 100% for. I would really like Ahsoka to go back to where her species are from, where the Togrutas are generally from. I know they've got a couple of colonies in different places, but I would like to see Ahsoka with her own species because we don't really get Togrutas in live action much. We get a smidge of Shark Tea, and that's it, really. We haven't got much of that, and I would like to see almost her people interact with a member of their species who's a Jedi, even if it's an old clan or something like that. I don't think they will. But I personally would quite like that. I would like that idea because I think that's a part of Ahsoka we haven't seen. And it'd be interesting seeing that. When it comes to other exotic locations, I mean, I'm a sucker for prequels. So I'd be like, what's happening at Naboo right now? Right. It would be nice if she went there and saw maybe the grave of Padme. That would be a really nice thing, I think.
She was a friend, yeah.
Exactly. And, we saw in... it was either Tales of the Jedi or Clone Wars. I think it was Tales of the Jedi. She was there at Padme's funeral. So she's been there. She's literally been there.
Yeah.
So I would like, if I could have anywhere that I'd want to see, anywhere to do with the prequels, I think would be really cool. And I suspect we are going to get something like that. And we're going to get a Force Ghost interaction with Anakin, I suspect. I've got more to say on that, but I'll hold my tongue on that element. But that's the main thing. I like planets in Star Wars, but I can't really think of any that really reach out. I mean, I'd love her to go to Dagobah and go to the Dark Side Cave. That would be awesome. But I'm more interested in places that have something, less so than the visual, what the place actually looks like visually. What about yourself? Do you have any sort of favorites?
No, I'm actually going to go and do 180 trajectory from you. And I'm going to think from the perspective of not Ahsoka, but Thrawn, because he's a major figure in the show. And perhaps they have a plot line where they show him in isolation and her in isolation. That's kind of their storylines clash into one another. Since Thrawn is coming from this very exotic, unknown regions of space and the Chiss ascendancy, I would like to see planets and locations that we haven't seen before that expand the universe of Star Wars, that makes it larger, versus doing something like Ahsoka casually encountering Luke Skywalker. I was like, aha, by the way, I knew your dad, kid. What's up? Expand the universe and show us places that, like, sort of what Andor did. And it didn't feel like they chose the settings sort of like your desktop backgrounds, like like when you get with one visual style, you just change it for another one just to change the landscape. They sort of, it's so grounded in the places where the story transpires that you totally believe it. That's what I want to see from Ahsoka. New locations where major plot points are taking place, and it grounds those planets or sectors of unknown space into the bulk of the Star Wars that we know.
And would you want to see that on location? Because that's one of my favorite parts about Andor, is that it feels real because they're actually filming like outside. I know you got a Star Wars thing.
Definitely on location, absolutely on location. I mean, if you're doing something really, really exotic, like Coruscant, like if you imagine something like, Chiss world, their home planet, whatever it may be in this canon, I don't know how much of it can be shot on the location, but because I do enjoy exotic, fantastical, architecture and huge foreign-looking landscapes. That's all cool-looking to me. However they resolve it, as long as it looks cool, but more importantly, how much it pertains to the story.
Good point.
Thrawn, Harrison Dula, Mon Mothma, a little bit of Ezra Bridger, they all appear in this trailer. And my question is, how do you think they should evolve Ahsoka's character and bounce back off of these different characters?
I think they're going to try...
Like, how are they going to impact her development further into the story?
I think they're going to try and bring her more into the rebellion, I guess. It's a hard one because I feel like at this point she's going to be a bit of a loner. Like at the end of Rebels, we saw her in a like full Gandalf garb, and it's like she's this really powerful Force user. She's kind of enlightened in some ways, and after Return of the Jedi, like what is she doing? She's kind of searching for Thrawn, as we saw in Mandalorian. But Mando's set 5 odd years after Return of the Jedi, so for 5 years, what was she doing?
Yeah.
And I can't see her being involved in politics a lot, so I can just see her kind of wandering off doing her own stuff, not dissimilar to what we saw Luke doing after Return of the Jedi. But Luke's more like, I need to rebuild the Jedi Order, and I feel like she's going to kind of be lost in some ways, trying to figure out what to do with herself. And I feel like the Rebels crew are going to be the kind of the human element that bring this almost ethereal being. Like she's become elevated above so many other people because there are so few Jedi now, so few Force users. There's no new big bad. Luke's kind of trying to do his own thing, disappearing off, finding artifacts, etc. She's a double lightsabered person with white lightsabers, who wears all white, who's this person who's been alive and trained under Darth Vader when he was good, fought in the Clone Wars, and is older than Anakin by Luke than quite a lot. So she's really could almost be his mentor in some ways, but she's, I assume, choosing not to do that. So I think they need to bring her back to the galaxy needs this or galaxy needs that in some ways, kind of make her more human and more involved with people again.
Okay.
What do you think?
I had a totally different idea.
I'd be really interested.
I was really captured by the first frames of the trailer. And as a huge Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones fan, I just feel like she's more because she decides not to be a part of this old dying order that failed her. And she's not trying to teach Grogu, and obviously she's not going to teach Luke. The way that she can service the new rising republic with Mon Mothma and fighting the new coming adversity, this heir to the Empire, is somehow delving into the undiscovered or long forgotten past that may be used as a tool to A, help grow the new republic, and B, fight off thrones. So I almost see her on this merry chase of discovering this new shocking truth about the Jedi or Sith past, and she's in these ancient ruins. And as she's figuring out where she belongs between serving Mon Mothma and fighting Thrawn, that's her grand adventure. That's her personal destiny. It's not just being forever fighting the war of the Imperial remnants and Thrawn, but delivering the fire, kind of like, like in the Greek mythology, what's the god's name that brings fire to the people? Oh my god,
I couldn't tell you, if I'm honest with you. I know a bit about Greek mythology, but not as
it totally
much.
escapes me, guys. But
there's Apollo, who's the one who brings the sun on the chariot, but that's not fire to the humans.
He basically the god that brings fire to the people, the
Hephaestus?
knowledge. Hephaestus, there you go. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Spirit animal, guys. You're like, Mike is saving my body for the second time on the podcast, but almost in that sense, where she has a greater purpose than being stuck between these two worlds.
I wonder if she's going to also potentially be like hunting down dark side artifacts. Like, I'm at a lot. I'm really interested to see what she's going to be doing, because Luke, I would feel like she'd be doing what Luke was doing, which is going around finding artifacts and trying to build the Jedi Order, but she's not part of the Jedi Order. So what does someone do when there's no more war to fight, when she's not even really a soldier? Like, what's her purpose?
Yeah, especially if you kind of like raise this question again in light of what we know what happens in the sequel trilogy, right?
Yeah.
Where everything that she seems to be projecting herself towards, catapulting her towards, fighting Thrawn, that's all going to amount to zero because the First Order rises again and the Republic
Where
fails.
was she? Where was she? Where was she at that time?
Yeah.
My thought is like, are we going to talk about what we think is going to happen with Ahsoka and the content beyond that?
Please, by all means, go for it.
So I think I've said this before, I can't remember if it was on this show or another one, but my theory is that, I think now it's been rumored anyway, so it may sound like I'm talking up my ass, but if people go back and listen to all content I've ever done in my life about Star Wars, you'll find it somewhere. But basically, I said the film, what's going to happen, it's all going to be a combination, all these series are going to be build up to basically a live action canon remake of Heir to the Empire. That's what it's going to be. And spoilers for the finale of the Heir to the Empire book trilogy, but Rook, to my knowledge, betrays Thrawn, and that's basically how the kind of the turning point of the final battle, in a sense. And spoiler for Rebels, Rook died he didn't, do a backtrack and save Thrawn or anything. He got electrocuted and killed. And so,
unless they rickrolled us and he survived somehow.
Yeah, but what I think they're going to do is do that with the character Eli Vanto, who's obviously in the Canon Thrawn books. He plays a major role. He's probably, to my mind, going to be the Rook character. He's going to be somebody who supports Thrawn for the majority of the book. In a
good point.
Position, but he's going to be a moral point where Thrawn goes too far, and the book Thrawn that we get and the Rebels Thrawn we get, the live action, the Rebels Thrawn is slightly more violent. He kills innocents more freely, whereas the Thrawn in the books is trying to eat it back. So there's a disconnect there where it could be a line by Eli Vanto coming into it and being like, "What are you doing, Thrawn? I thought you meant to protect the innocent, blah, blah, blah." Him being the turncoat. And my thing as well, this is the part I've not said before, is I wonder if the Heir to the Empire movie is going to be where they kill off Ahsoka. Because it'll be a big event. It'll be a big sacrifice. It'll mean that she's then not in the sequel trilogy, because obviously it's going to... If she lives, they're going to have to do more series or books or something to explain why she's not in there. And for being a character that's going to be this major, they're going to have a good reason why she wasn't in the sequel trilogy at all, like a damn good one. And her voice, you can hear it when Rey is doing the all the Jedi living.
That's right. Yeah. Good point.
And obviously, she could be alive, maybe, but it's kind of insinuated she isn't. And it's like, what could you be doing that's more important than this right now? Obviously, there is that question of Return of the Jedi, which I think we'll get, but it's still these kind of elements of things. So I can't remember it was all about my theory of what the movie's going to be, but I think she's going to die. So that's what I think this is all going to be kind of building up to. Interesting
point. I can't even begin to presume where it's going. But guys, if you will permit me, actually, I don't need your permission. For a moment here, I'm going to become just a little bit of toxic of comparing the previous efforts on the live action front to what we expect from Ahsoka, because Jon Favreau's Mandalorian, I feel, was like this surface level, episodic, popcorn chewy kind of, bless you, experience with the main character, Din Djarin, and some Clone Wars story sprinkled in there. Really, because Din Djarin, there's no rhyme or reason for him to be in Star Wars. He's just like, I'm on an adventure, because the stuff that's going around with Grogu, it just, at this point, amounts to nothing. The Boba Fett show does completely 180 to the character that we see in the original trilogy, and it shows in the beginning of Mandalorian, where he's just this unhinged, psychopathic killer badass. He's now wants to rule with respect, which I felt it was so dissonant with understanding what this character is. So I felt like both shows were lacking in clear vision or understanding what Star Wars is all about. Versus Andor, that focused on major characters, and it puts all the eggs in this one basket, developing one major character and his tension as unwilling hero versus one evil empire. It's a very basic setup, but I feel that it paid off. What do you feel Ahsoka show needs to accomplish to rise above the average Star Wars experiences we had so far?
It needs to learn from the good and best parts about Clone Wars and Rebels. It needs to not fall in the trap of The Mandalorian. It needs to stand by its own 2 feet. I have hope that Filoni will do that, because the Filoni episodes of Mandalorian have been among the best. So I think, and he co-created at the very least with George Lucas Ahsoka. So Ahsoka is like the last vestige of Lucas's legacy, really, that Dave Filoni is holding on to, in a way. So I think the final respect will be to create this character and do it in the best way possible. And I think from what we've seen in Mandalorian, we get that. We need good action scenes. We need there to be a compelling storyline. But my fear is that the Ahsoka series is going to be inconsequential, and that what it's really going to be is a prologue to the Thrawn movie, be it Heir to the Empire or whatever. Now, we've got a few years till it's allegedly coming out. So there's going to be content between that, Mando Series 4, I assume, probably some sort of other series. If it's going to be Rangers of the New Republic and it's going to focus all around Hera and the Ghost Crew, who knows? But I think it's all going to be in, what are the stakes going to be? What are they trying to show with this? I imagine a part of it is going to be recapping to a degree what she was doing in the in Clone Wars, like who Anakin is to her, that kind of thing. I imagine we're going to get a degree of that. And I know you won't like this very much, but I personally want the closure of her having a conversation with Anakin or with Luke, and someone telling her, while seeing it in a flashback or whatever, that Anakin turned back to the light. I want to see her get that moment. I want to see that emotional beat hit.
That's very important too. Yeah,
I want to see that, because it teaches the audience who don't know about animation who she is and who Darth Vader was. And she could show off her emotional acting chops as well. It'd be good to show as a human character who has emotion as we go into things. But then from there, I'm worried, because I'm certain she's not going to die on her own show. The Rebels crew might do, but I don't know if they would kill them in the Ahsoka show. It seems a bit too soon once again. I think they're going to save a lot of these deaths for, the big movie that's coming out. So my concern is that it's going to be one of those things where it's not actually end up going to be an essential watch. That's my kind of worry. But in the same token, it's a weird one, because in Mandalorian, some major elements of what happens to Mandalorian and Grogu, as you said earlier, happen in Boba Fett. And when you watch Mandalorian Series 3, it doesn't say, by the way, go watch Book of Boba Fett. It doesn't say previously on Book of Boba Fett. It just goes straight into it. It's like, oh yeah, Grogu and Mando back together. Don't worry about it. And you're like, but some people haven't seen it. Like, what? So maybe there will be major story beats in Ahsoka. And then when Mando Series 4 comes out, like, oh yeah, there's a Thrawn guy come back. Don't worry about it. And you're like, what? But I just don't want Mando showing up. I don't want this. I don't want that. I want the Ahsoka show to be about Ahsoka. That's the main thing. I want it to be Force stuff. I want there to be lightsaber battles. And I want us to get closure on her character from the events of the original trilogy and the events of Rebels. They're the core things I want. I don't think we're going to get an Andor show. I think we're going to get a show much more aligned with Mandalorian. But I am hoping it's going to be more halfway between Mandalorian and Rebels. And that would do it for me, to be honest with you. Mandalorian has a lot of things I do like. It's not the perfect show, and even
Same
I
here,
even tell,
actually. Yeah.
yeah, it does do a lot of good things, but it's a bit too generic and sounds derogatory. It's normie. Everyone
It
who
is
doesn't
normie.
like,
It is normie.
everyone who just
Yeah.
watches the films goes, "I love Mandalorian. It's great. It's amazing." But when you read the books, and especially when you watch the TV series, things like it, you go, "Yeah, Mandalorian's really good, but it's not my favorite." When you consume as much Star Wars content as we do, it becomes a thing where there is so much content better than the Mandalorian, so much more.
It's the dessert, and shows like Rebels is the meat and potatoes.
Yeah, Clone Wars and Rebels are two of the greatest pieces of Star Wars content. I'd even go so far
100%.
to push that. I've controversially said that I think Rebels, you could argue, it goes tit for tat with the original trilogy. If we take away,
Mike, sorry to cut you off. Rebels and
go
the
ahead.
Clone Wars show are the best things that happened to Star Wars since the original trilogy, and it's the mantra I will keep on repeating.
I agree 100%. I think Rebels, personally, can go tit for tat with the original trilogy.
Yeah.
I think both of them have an equal amount of flaws and positives, emotional beats and things. But, if we take away the obvious impact that the original trilogy had on cinema and sci-fi and space fantasy as a whole, if we strip back that and objectively just watch those three movies and all of Rebels and compare certain elements of them, I think you'd have a strong case to say that Rebels could be better. I think you'd have a strong case for saying that the original trilogy would be too. But I think if creating something that's that good, and Filoni was at the helm with Ahsoka in major plot points of that, my real hope is that we get that kind of stuff. We get the Twilight of the Apprentice feels. We get the World Between Worlds episodes. We get those Jedi stuff. I don't want Luke to be doing Jedi stuff post Mandalorian. I don't really care about that. We've explored it a bit in books. He's just doing Jedi Order stuff. That's cool. Leave him to do that, whatever. I would like to see Ahsoka doing cool Jedi stuff. That's the character I'm interested in. If I want to see Luke doing Jedi Order stuff, I would read the Legends New Jedi Order series, to be honest with you.
That's a good...
And played Jedi Outcast and all these other decades and decades of Luke being in that.
Yeah. I think that what it needs to do is be as brave and bold as Andor, in the sense of not trying to kind of pick an ear and listen to what fans are asking for, what they reacted to before, because trying to replicate what worked before, it's dead, like on landing. It's like the moment it lands, it's done. You can't do that. At the same time, it needs to understand its sources, the heart and spirit of the Clone Wars show, who Ahsoka is, what are her stakes, what are her personality traits, what she believes in, what she fights for, and how does she evolve, how does she grow and interact with or push against the characters that are going to be in the show, and how do they influence her. We don't see the same repeat Ahsoka broken record that we saw in The Mandalorian or in the Rebel show, that she is different now. Yet again, she grows and she does things differently. To me, the biggest thing is, with all the action, because Disney time and again have proven that they can visually represent Star Wars brand like no one else, like nobody's business. I mean, from the visual perspective, every single show, Book of Boba Fett, Kenobi, Mandalorian, they look like visually arresting. Mm-hmm. The problem for me was, and I promised I would not do this, I'll just very briefly touch on Kenobi, it's just, it felt in a way so offensive to me how cognitively distant it was with the prequel trilogy, how it had nothing to draw upon or evolve from the prequel trilogy. And I felt like these larger than life figures were brought in a show that didn't elevate the stakes at all, and it just riffed off of ideas that existed before. And perhaps I reacted to it very, very emotionally, but I don't know, I just felt like it was such a missed opportunity. What I fear and don't want Ahsoka to become is just like play on this nostalgia. It's like, hey, we remember who Ahsoka was, what she means to you, and we're gonna try to like recapture the spirit of that. No, be Andor. Be bold, be innovative, believe in the vision of what you're trying to tell, and be coherent with your vision. Stick with your guns, go with it. Go for broke. This is how you break new ground. This is how you become a trendsetter. This is how you become Star Wars again. When you chart a new course, obviously you can't do it again the way George Lucas would have done it because he's not part of it anymore, but go again. I think on that behalf, Andor has massively succeeded. And once again, Remember what I told you when Kenobi was being advertised, and I said it's such an enormous potential. We have this opportunity again with Ahsoka. She means to me just as much as the best parts of the Clone Wars show involving Anakin. We have this chance again to do it right.
I agree, and I think we will get there. I think it will be brilliant. I don't think it'll be as good as I want it to be. I think that's a pipe dream.
Fingers crossed.
But I've got hopes. I think it does depend on where they want to go with the character, who the threat is. My ideal would be like Ezra being the foil. I would love it with these blood orange lightsaber people being the baddies for the first few episodes, and then her realizing it's actually Ezra who's been turned by Thrawn because he's so convincing to join the Chiss Ascendancy, who then use the remnant of the Empire to try and further push forward, and then she has to put Ezra in his place. That's what I would quite like, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Right.
I think that people are going to be too upset with Ezra going bad, but I would really like that element of things. Instead, what I suspect he's going to be used for is,
instead of playing it safe and putting Ezra and Ahsoka in their familiar place where we think they belong.
Yeah, I want them to be against each other, be head to head. I want Ezra to have been changed by going away with Thrawn, and it needs to explain. It's like it will upset people, and which is why I don't think they'll do it. But the kind of Last Jedi thing, Luke was hidden away for that long for a reason. He even says, "Why was I hidden on the most hidden planet in the most remote place?
Yeah.
If I didn't want you to find me, what you thought I was going to pick up my lightsaber and just take on the whole First Order with my laser sword?"
Yeah.
I kind of want it to be like that. I want it to be Ezra is a character who's gone off with Thrawn. He's come back changed, and he's like, he doesn't want to be helping this anymore. He's seen it in a different way, and he's kind of dabbled in the dark side a bit. I would love them to do that.
Yeah,
I don't think it's going to happen. I think Ahsoka's quest is going to be just trying to find Ezra, to vaguely blah 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 Jedi positive person Ezra, what happened to him and Thrawn. And then she's going to find him, and there's going to be a bit of probably lying between them in some ways. And then they're going to fight along the way. She's going to be fighting these baddies, and then Ezra and her are going to team up, beat these baddies, and then the Thrawn reveals kind of be at the end that he was the puppet master. I think that's what's going to happen. It will be fun, I'm sure, but I'm just like, is the love of Rebels for me going to be enough if the story doesn't do enough? If you know what I mean.
got you. I follow exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Mike, before I hit you with the last question, thanks a lot. I missed talking to you. I really appreciate all of your thoughts. Once again, you help expand my mind and perspective on the characters that I thought I knew. You just always have these interesting, unique angles, points of perspectives, and comparisons that make me go like, huh, all right, I didn't think of it. That's pretty exciting. And thanks for joining me again, man. I'm pretty sure we're going to find another exciting topic to talk about soon. Please tell the fans where they can find your stuff, where they can watch your podcast, and then we'll hit our next final question.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate it. And you asking these kind of questions have made me think of things I haven't necessarily thought of. So it's not just I've got all these thoughts immediately in my mind. It's been they had to be provoked. They had to be drawn out
Dynamic
by
duo.
your hosting. Yes, exactly. I mean, your hosting skills are great. You know, I really enjoyed the Claudia Gray conversation that you had. You asked her some really cool questions. I could see she was very receptive to those and many of your other interviews. So they are great. But where can people find me? Well, you can go to youtube.com/genuine Chit-Chat, and over there I've got every episode of Star Wars Comics in Canon and my interviews. So my interviews/conversations, I've just done my 200th episode, been going for 6 years, and I've spoken to Claudia Gray, Kevin Scott, George Mann, Kevin Shinnick. All those people are Star Wars writers and things. And I've had Paolo Villanelli, who's as well as Ben has had on, who's the comic book artist. I'm planning on having more people on as well. So if you want to hear Star Wars conversations, there's loads of those. Lots of non-Star Wars conversations as well. I spoke with Michael McCormick, who's the puppeteer on Labyrinth, and he also did some puppet work for Return of the Jedi, and even showed me some of the puppets. He created Silicious B. Crumb, which is quite fun. So if you want to see any of those things, and or Star Wars Comics and Canon at Genuine Chit-Chat, to clarify, on YouTube, but also on all social media places. You can find out more information. But Star Wars Comics and Canon, I specifically make a show where you never have to have read a single Star Wars comic in your entire life. Any piece of content I tackle on Star Wars Comics and Canon, be it a book review, a comic, or anything, you never have to have consumed any piece of Star Wars media apart from probably watching the films. Aside from that, you can enjoy the show. I go through the plot details. I give you additional information that we go through, like trivia information, familiar faces, those sorts of things. I do crossover events with all the companion comics. So if you can't pick up everything, I've tackled all the Marvel canon comic stuff, and I tackle quite a bit of Dark Horse things as well. And I've done every bit of High Republic content as well. All the books, all the comics, all that sort of jazz, making my way through them all. I've done all of phase 1. So I've done a lot. a lot of Star Wars stuff. But go to Genuine Chit Chat's YouTube channel, and all of that information is over there. I've even interviewed Ben a couple times on there to talk about non-Star Warsy things.
So you just guys heard from the horse's mouth all that staggering amount of information. Next to Mike, I sound like just a casual Star Wars bullshitter who just basically wings his way through his podcasts and finds hopefully interesting conversations to talk about. Final question. We talked about Legends and we talked about canon. There's these two alternating, schools of thought. There are huge amount of eyeballs on this Ahsoka show from canon and Legends fans. How can it satisfy both?
It won't. It's not going to, because there's too many fans, more so on the Legends side, that are not willing to accept any positives that Disney bring to the table. And anything Disney touch, be it Legends material or not, they'll be upset by. If we put those to one side, and the more reasonable Legends fans, people like yourself, I am a fan of Legends. I'm more of a fan of canon, almost purely on the basis of how much content I've actually consumed is much more disproportionate towards canon. But I think Legends fans, just don't want the characters that they love to be taken and changed their core values. I think that's the big thing. If you have, we've got Thrawn. Thrawn in Rebels is slightly lighter than the Thrawn that we get in the books of Heir to the Empire. He just kills someone on the deck in front of everyone in the first book just because they missed out on a tractor beam catching Luke's X-Wing. And so that kind of having no mercy is a lot more extreme. So I think that they need to find a middle ground for him still being threatening and stuff without him losing who he is in Rebels. And then I think you just need to have a right amount of nods. I think if they bring Sabayoth into it, for example, which I don't think they will, but if they do, you need to go full hog with it. You need to really we're going to do what we did with him in the books. We can't just pop him in for one or two scenes and completely devalue him as a character. If you're going to use certain pieces of Legends material, it either has to be a very subtle nod, or it has to be a flushing out and using it with some of the core values used, or used in a powerful, story-driven way. The problem I find sometimes that certain stories do is they use characters. Marvel do it with the MCU a little bit, where they use a character for something and then they change the fabric of the character, and you're like, why did you call this character? Why don't you just call them a new name and do it? Why did you use the aesthetic of this and their name, even though the character you use is nothing like the original?
And that definitely can be frustrating to fans. I see it as well.
Yeah, and it does happen. Unfortunately, it's one of those. It even happens to certain characters that pop up in like comics or books, and then you see them in live action. It can be slightly different and jarring. So, I think the best way, canon fans are more easy to keep happy for the most part. I think that on the basis that if you like the sequel trilogy, you will like pretty much all the live action Star Wars stuff. Bar maybe Book of Boba Fett. Maybe there's one or two you don't like as much, but I generally feel that almost everyone who generally liked the sequels then generally liked the live action series. Not all, but that's usually it. So it's the Legends fans that are harder to make happy. And without Rook being there, that's going to be a thing, because if they haven't seen live action, if they haven't seen the animated stuff, they won't know that Rook is gone. And then it's like, what can they do?
Well, I know they can do.
What do you want them to do?
I have the answer.
Do it.
I have the ultimate formula, Disney, how you can satisfy both camps. And I will be a little bit controversial and kind of contradict what I generally say in regards to Star Wars live action. I think in this case, the ultimate olive branch to fandom and to elevate the show, aside from all other things that we mentioned, what it needs to accomplish stylistically, narratively, be very focused, character-centric and very focused, and have one single unique vision. The ultimate olive branch is Luke Skywalker. Because there was a precedent set before in the Star Wars show where, whether it's, Rebels or where it's the Book of Boba Fett or Mandalorian, another major character steps into it, and it could work towards the show's advantage, or it can completely disrupt the experience. Ahsoka is very much connected to the destiny of Skywalkers. Very much. And with eloquent writing, you can very well write Luke into its pivotal moment. Not steal Ahsoka's thunder, not try to be like, here's Luke Skywalker deepfake show 1.5 because here's an episode of him. Sort of what happened with the Mandalorian. What you can do here, no, Book of Boba Fett, right? This is when Mandalorian showed up. Sorry. Yeah. But what you can do is, whether it's de-aged, Mark Hamill's performance, because the actor that they hired to do the facial, digital reconstruction, he's still hired by them. So they're obviously using it for something, right? So it's either through that technique or completely casting a new actor, which I would be all up for. You can have a key pivotal moment to the show. First of all, you need to do your homework and establish the main struggle and tension, put the stakes up so freaking high that the fans, the audience, are along the ride, whether they're canon fans or Legends fans, like, oh man, all right, this is not the era of the Empire that I mentioned, but holy crap, I just want to see it, reluctantly watch and see how it ends. It needs to be this captivating. And when you're carrying that momentum, when you have that power of storytelling, boom, at the key moment, not like in the Mandalorian show, Luke Skywalker magically just finds the ship stuck in the middle of space. It's like, oh, by the way, Luke Skywalker in the hallway scene. No, you introduce him in the key point and you write him, you weave him into the story in such a way that he comes in and he saves the freaking day. And Ahsoka is there to demonstrate that even as powerful as the Jedi that she is, what only helps her character-wise is to say that, look, sometimes even I need help. Sometimes to fight this insurmountable odds, like Thrawn, we need the dude. We need the Skywalker. We need Luke. And it could be 10 times more powerful than his hallway scene in Mandalorian.
I would not have bet in 100 years that you would say that.
Really?
No, I thought you were actually going to say, the thing is Luke Skywalker. He can't be in the show at all. That's what I thought you were going to say. Yeah, 100%. I thought you were like, just don't have men anymore. I was like, I would have been completely on that. It's quite funny because, as I said, I just want the scene where he tells her about Vader. That's all I want. I want them to hire someone to be actually play a young Luke as opposed to it being deepfake. I would much rather that, to be honest with you, to have it look like him, like Sebastian Stan does. But I just don't want Luke's appearance or anyone else's cameo to be overshadowing. That's my
same
issue.
here.
That's
absolutely.
I kind of want everyone we saw in the trailer, apart from Zeb. I just want them to be in it. What I would murder Megan for, I wouldn't. I'm joking on that part. But what my number one Star Wars wish for Ahsoka, Kanan Force Ghost. If we got that, I may cry. Literally, actually cry at that because Kanan's my favorite Star Wars character.
Yeah.
I am so sure we will not get that.
Yeah.
I think we're more likely to get a Yoda Force Ghost. I wouldn't mind. I mean, if it's Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Force Ghost, if it was Obi-Wan a Force Ghost, if we had obviously Hayden Christensen Force Ghost, I think is a shoe-in. That's almost definitely going to happen. But that would be my ultimate one, which I'm certain they're not going to do. But live action Kanan. That
fans, look. Mike is putting his bet on the Force Ghost. I'm putting my bet on de-aged or substitute or some permutation of Luke Skywalker.
I think Force Ghost Hayden Christensen is more likely than that, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's a possibility. But I definitely do want to reconvene with you, perhaps after the first episode or perhaps halfway through the series, to sit down and discuss about it. But yeah, man, the hype is there. I am very excited. I will forever be a Star Wars fan, despite the hiccups and despite the moments where, in the best hopes to produce something good, sometimes they just fail, because that's the nature of creative process.
Yeah, and I just want to add two things. One, if people didn't know, the Ahsoka book by E.K. Johnston, right there, shows how Ahsoka got her white lightsabers. It's purifying.
And it's a great book. It's an excellent read.
It's very, very good. And it kind of expands on one of the episodes of Tales of the Jedi. So I'd recommend that. And her purifying of crystals is just amazing. I'd love to see that live action, like properly. And then on top of that, I was going to say that obviously speaking to you is always delightful. It's good fun. The Ahsoka show I am very hyped for. The only show I'm more hyped for than the Ahsoka show is The Acolyte. But that's because it's all new characters, all new cast, dark side stuff, mystery thriller, and High Republic. And that's all I cannot wait. It's gonna that's my number one show. As much as I love Ahsoka and I'm a big fan of Clone Wars and Rebels, Acolyte is my absolute number one, but a very close second is Ahsoka, and I'm so excited. And if Ahsoka can be half as good as Andor was, then I'll be happy. But imagine if we get an Ahsoka show and it's got all the best parts of Mandalorian and what we liked about Andor in it. Like if that happens, I want a Star Wars show that I want to rewatch. Do you know what I mean? Mandalorian, I watch like the odd bits here and there, or the odd episode. Kenobi, it's like the odd scenes. Book of Boba Fett, it's the two main episodes for me with Mando in it. But like Andor, I watched, and me and Megan have been rewatching it again because it's just that good. And I want Ahsoka to make me want to rewatch it. I've said I may never rewatch Kenobi again until I maybe have kids I want to show them, because it's just the best bits I can watch in 5 minutes on YouTube. So why would I spend so many hours doing it? So that's my hope. Rewatchability. I want a show like Rebels or Clone Wars that I can rewatch and love
I will
again.
forever be grateful for the existence of the prequel trilogy. Because with all their flaws, I still enjoy watching them. They still have key moments for me, which are very important, essential for Star Wars experience. I'm forever grateful for George Lucas carrying on his creative forces into his animated show and mentoring Dave Filoni along the way. Let's see how it does in this show. And as always, I approach it with cautious optimism, and I hope for the best.
Agreed.
On that note, guys, thank you so much for tuning in and watching us to guess. Rest assured, when that Acolyte full trailer hits, Mike will be here to give you all of his keynotes. But thank you very much for checking us out. All the important links to check out Mike's channels will be in the video description below. We'll check you guys next time. Take care, everyone.